excitement of the regular cast members, the regular players, Don Johnson, Philip Michael Thomas, Sanja, Olivia, yeah, being an outsider, so to speak. I'm sort of looking at everything, and I'm seeing the excitement the actors are having, and they're just like racehorses chomping at the bit, getting ready to go. They know they have something special. They know that audiences are going to be excited about the show, and they're excited about doing the work and approaching the work. So you could just feel that enthusiasm. It was kind of, they had a lot of confidence in the show being successful, and rightly so. So, so that was what I remember most about being doing the first episode that I did. It was so near the beginning of his run, the first season, the second episode. I wasn't sure if it was I've always told people, oh, it was the first episode after the pilot, but it was the second episode. I'm sure you've done research, and I know I haven't. So, I'll take your word for it. But there was a lot of enthusiasm, and it played over into the guest cast as well. We knew it was a hot new show, and everyone was having fun with it. Everyone was excited about it.
And that first sort of episode, the big scene for yourself is that limo scene, where you sort of sitting opposite Philip Michael Thomas and Don Johnson, and there's obviously they get busted. There's a faulty wire, and Philip Thomas, and the music sort of goes off, and you're sort of busting them, and that sort of scene there. The sort of details in sort of shooting a limousine scene where it's back and sort of front with that sort of thing. Is it intricate enough in terms of that? Because with camera angles and all that, in terms of trying to predict a moving sort of car, and obviously that which obviously we know that scene led up to the shootout as well, where obviously Ed O'Neill showed his true colors and sort of thing. So a pivotal sort of moment in that episode.
Oh, my memory of it isn't as vivid as yours. You know, I just remember it being highly, um, shooting something like that there's so many details, and it doesn't move nearly as fast as it does on when you're watching it on your television screen. So um, it was really there are other episodes that I remember much more clearer than that.
Yeah.
I don't remember all of the details of that, except that I'm trying to even remember what my character was doing in the limo. Okay, I don't really even remember that well. I just remember Jiveman as being kind of around, but I don't quite know. I don't quite remember that episode as clearly as that to be very specific about what what happened during the shooting. Uh, you mentioned the last episode that I did.
Yes, 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 with
That's
Sergeant
the
Orlando.
episode that I have the clearest memory of
Mm.
because that was a role that I really enjoyed doing, and I enjoyed playing that with Philip, and we had a great relationship in that scene, in those scenes that we had to establish for the role, for the TV show, for the part, and so we worked well together, and I played like an old friend of his who was not in Miami, but he had to come to me for some sort of help in the case that he was working on and support. And we had sort of a back and forth rapport about that. And that was a fun scene to do, In fact, that was a scene that I saved. And, actors have reels to
Yeah.
demonstrate what they can do. And I put that particular scene on a reel so that people could see me that work because it worked very well and it served to show that you can play that kind of part, a cop and all of that, and but going back to Jive Man, what I remember most about that experience was what I was just telling you earlier about it was so close to the beginning of the show and being around, Don and Philip and the rest of the cast members and observing the newness of it and their excitement about it. But I don't know. I don't remember Jive Man that well.
Yeah.
I don't
And
remember shooting the scene.
in terms of interactions with Ed O'Neill as well, was there a good sort of balance? And were you introduced with each other on set, or had you worked with Ed before?
I've worked with him since, but I never had worked with him
Mm.
before that episode. So, but we had a good time working together, a good time working it out. Tell me more about the limo scene that you mentioned. Maybe it'll come back to me,
Yeah,
but I don't remember.
yourself and Ed O'Neill are sitting beside the main the main guy, the main Buster guy, and they're trying
Uh-huh.
to get evidence on ye in terms of that, and they're wired, and there's a malfunction in Tubbs's walkie-talkie, and it gets discovered. Music goes off, and you rip it off, and yourself and Ed O'Neill point a gun at him in terms of that, and you bust him as sort of cops.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I don't remember it. I
No
really
problem.
don't.
No
You know,
problem.
it's like that. Sometimes you do things and you just move on, and
Yeah.
um,
We'll get Brent. We'll get forward anyway. We'll move on,
mhm,
and I have a few questions about Orlando Jordan, that sort of role, and it's sort
mhm,
of intriguing because this is the episode where Don Johnson is playing his alter ego after a sort of a boat crash where he loses his sort of memory, and Tubbs
mhm.
comes to you in terms of like looking for help outside the book, but you're all by the book. You don't want to stray or bend the rules any
Right.
sort of way, and that causes a bit of, I would say, a bit of aggro or tension because Tubbs is that bit sort of desperate in terms of that, but you're insistent that everything must be done in the correct
Exactly.
manner.
Exactly. That was what our relationship was built on. The fact that he had to go by the book and adhere to the rules that I was setting for the operation that we were working together on. That was sort of like what brought tension to the scene. But at the same time, we were two people who had history with each other, who were close to each other as police professionals. So, there was a lot to play in that relationship that
Mm.
made it a really nice scene for Philip and for myself.
Mm. And when you're going off those sort of scenes, is it very much scripted or is there a bit of improv thrown away? Did the producers and directors let you add a bit to that sort of scene in terms of going back and forth?
In that show, maybe a little, but it's little tag things. It's not you can't really change the body of the scene uh and really just put in new dialogue. But you can do little things near the end of a scene to sort of cap it, to sort of give it like a sort of um, uh, a little nod, a little wink, to sort of make it sort of special, make it your own. But you don't really, in television, you don't really stray too far from the scripted dialogue unless there's a problem with that you discuss prior to shooting,
Mm.
you know.
Yeah.
Um,
And Brent, coming back after 3 seasons, and obviously this was a much beefier role, a much
mhm,
more mincier sort of role after season 4 in terms of that.
mhm.
Did you expect after you made your appearances on season 1 and those 2 episodes, did you ever think to yourself you would ever hear the call from Miami Vice, or did you think to yourself, well, I've had my turn, they're obviously going to look at elsewhere in different roles. So was it a very much a welcome surprise after 3 seasons when they came to you about this sort of role? Was it very much caught you by surprise, even?
You hit the nail on the head. I was totally, totally surprised because you're really asked to do a guest star on the same show once you've done one. I think it is two before the
Yeah.
role we're talking about. You know, that's unusual to get two, but to get a third one is totally shocking, for me. I had no expectation of that. And I don't know how it even happened. I try to remember. I know there was a director named Abel Ferrara that I had worked with in a movie called Fear City in New York. I had done a small role of a guy kind of similar to Jive Man, actually. He's hawking these papers, these bulletins on the street, and Abel, a film director and TV director, I worked with him then, and I think through him I got connected to Miami Vice because I know at least one of the episodes that I did on Miami Vice was directed by Abel, maybe even two.
Mm,
And I think that might have been what brought me into the show and got me that role in that third episode of Orlando
mm.
that we were talking about, which was the best of the three roles for my taste. I
Yeah.
think that's why it's the only one I really remember.
And Brent, in terms of an episode to remember, Antonio Vargas, Chris Cooper, and the wonderfully talented, went on to be a multi famous female actress, but little was known about her at the time when she appeared on Miami Vice. Julia Roberts was in the same episode as yourselves.
You're kidding me.
Yes, 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 yes,
I
yes.
didn't know that. I'm gonna have
Yeah.
to pull that up and take another look at that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Julia Roberts was actually playing the sort of the love interest of Sonny Don Johnson's alternative ego, Sonny
Uh-huh.
Burnett, in terms of that. So it was a very
Okay.
young Julia Roberts in that, and sort of a female lead. She was the
Right, right.
when Sonny was the bad guy. That was he sort of a lady that he was ensnared with in terms of that.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's good. That's good. It's quite a pedigree on that. It's quite some good company, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah,
And
but that was
Antonio Vargas as well, very much well renowned, obviously from Starsky and Hutch and Huggy Bear. But he sort of brings his sort of own sort of intrigue to the character, and you obviously informing of the big development of his body sort of being discovered, which leads to revelations that maybe that the ship peril mightn't have been all it seemed to be, dare I say.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the show. That's the
Yeah.
show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was it like? Did you get to spend a bit of time with Antonio Vargas on set, or did your paths cross at all?
You know, I've run across him outside the show at social events and that type of thing. Uh, but generally on these TV shows, it all depends on how much how is how the schedule is set
Mm,
up to how much time you're going to be on the show, and if you're actually going to be working with who, when, and how long you're going to be there. I don't remember in that third episode working directly with Tony Vargas. You know,
yeah, I think
my
you were
memory
confined to it was very much office scenes.
is very
I
much
think
office scenes.
I think there was one or two interactions with Chris Cooper who played the Jimmy character. He
Right,
was
right.
the dirty cop as well.
Exactly, exactly. But so I didn't really interact with Antonio, but I do know him off camera. I did meet him off camera, and then we talk about our, common history of our experience on Miami Vice. Uh, and I kind of, some of the characters like Huggy Bear, it
Mm.
makes me think of Jiveman,
Yeah.
that similarity, and I kind of uh, thought of that, when I was doing Jive Man. I would think of Huggy Bear and the similarity in the two parts, and the kind of a stock character in television dramas, TV detective shows.
Mm.
Uh, so maybe that's why I kind of just did it, and and it didn't have this special quality that Orlando had for me because I don't get to play a lot of comps, so getting one like that and a good part like that meant a lot to me.
Mm.
Uh,
And did you feel a bounce off that episode in Miami Vice at the time
oh
of that
yeah, oh
episode?
yeah.
Was there a bounce off it in terms of auditions that maybe, oh, I know you're a very much established actor, but did it
Mhm.
open up maybe doors that maybe might have been locked otherwise?
It certainly did. It did give me a bounce because it broadened my range in terms of what I could play. So I started getting opportunities in other areas that were similar to a cop, whether it would be a school principal or whether it would be a prosecutor. Those things started to come up after that.
Yeah.
My my agents showing people my work on that show in that scene, and it really did. I did get a bounce, most definitely,
Mm.
most
And I
definitely.
suppose when we think of iconic cult shows throughout the 80s and 90s, in terms of maybe what Walker Texas Ranger did for Texas and Dallas, we
Hmm
think of
hmm
maybe what Dukes of Hazzard did for the Central America and places like
Hmm.
Wyoming, places like that, Arkansas and all that, whereas the big redneck community was still
Hmm.
adored to even this day. Then you have probably the detective shows like Starsky and Hutch and this. But Miami Vice, in terms of it, really sort of was paid homage to really what was going on in Miami. Because let's face it, Miami was seen as a rough place in terms of in the 80s. It was a place where there was an awful lot of violence, there was an awful lot of drug use, but somehow they brought that to realism. But they also give it a sense of a glamour, a sense of a sex appeal, a sense of a stuff
Hmm.
like that that was never
Hmm.
really showcased about Miami before Miami Vice. Miami Vice made Miami cool, dare I say.
Miami what? What was the last?
Miami Vice made Miami cool in people's
Oh,
eyes.
right,
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly, exactly. It was cool. Vice becomes cool, you
yeah.
know. But yeah, I think that was the question is, was it a fair representation of Miami at that time, or what, did it sort of boot it up to a level that was
Yeah,
really beyond
yeah,
where it really was because of the
yeah.
way it's presented on television? Uh, I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. I think it was sort of based on a trend that was happening, and they took advantage of that and made something new and created something. You're used to like a show in Vegas or LA but Miami didn't have the visibility, as a sexy, exotic place where it's live and new things are happening, and as well as the crime scene and the drug smuggling and all of this kind of things, which are beginning to get some notoriety and some attention. It kind of came along at a time in the culture where people were ready to discover this new place that's a little bit like LA, but different, in the culture and in the people that 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 came there, and the Cuban culture, the food, the music, the Latin thing. There was a lot of different elements that they could sort of hype and present. They gave it a freshness, that I don't think was around before the show. you know
And was penultimate question for you, Brent. Around that time, were you based near enough to Miami, or did you travel particularly for those sort of
well,
episodes in terms of?
the the second the first episode, I think I was still living in New York. The
Okay,
other two, I was living in LA by that time. So either
okay,
way, I was a plane ride away, you know.
okay.
But no, I was never ever based in Miami. But yeah, it was either New York or LA. I think one of the episodes, it might have been Sergeant Harity. I was just getting set up with my wife and baby in New York. That came through, and I went down to do that particular episode. And then later on, of course, I was a little more uh, um, stabilized in LA. By the
And
time I got to
because
Orlando.
Yeah, and because that part in season four was such a big, huge part, dare I say, and you were based in Los Angeles, obviously you couldn't really turn that down. But maybe there's some of the parts that maybe were a bit lesser in the first season if they had arrived in season four, given the commute. But because this was such a big, massive part, and you probably knew in advance of that,
Hmm.
that probably made up your mind for would have been first time New York is close enough to Miami, but obviously LA is a different story.
It's a different story. And oddly enough, for some reason, I think probably I never auditioned for those last two parts, Haggerty and Orlando. They
Mm.
just called up and asked me if I was available, asked my agent if I was available to do it. And of course, you would do it because, they were gracious enough to just offer it to you. There was no reason not to do it. It was still a hit show.
Mm.
And it was playing a different kind of a role than Jiveman. When Haggerty, the next part I got, was like, oh, they want me to play a cop. And Abel was directing it, who I worked with on a film. So I figured, well, maybe Abel threw my name in the hat, and And even though I had been on the show, they said, okay, and I can't remember if Abel, I know he directed the episode with Haggerty, but I don't know. I don't think he directed the third show that I did. But by that time, they knew me, and they just asked me to do that role as well. So I said, sure. So there were gifts. They really gifted me very well, because they were keeping me visible in a very successful show that people liked, and the parts kept getting better and better, for me.
Brent Jennings, final question before I let you go for the final 30 seconds. Is there any funny story or memory from your time on Miami Vice? Maybe it's interaction with a cast member, maybe it's in between takes or something like that, something that
Well,
brings a laugh or a smile to your face even to this day.
well, I learned something about acting. Edward James Olmos was doing Castillo, and the first time I saw him work, I'm standing on the set and I'm watching him. He was kind of like this Zen thing. He was always calm. He never said much. He spoke very quietly. He moved very stealthily and I mean, it was just like floating through the scene. It was very low key and very focused, and I had never seen I was wondering, is this, and I went up to him at a break and we started talking. And I said, do you think that you can hold that? You can keep that? You can maintain that throughout everything that you have to do in the series as the character, that stillness, that quiet, you know, how could, and he says, yeah, I think I can, you know, and I went, oh, wow, okay. And as I watched the show during the years and saw him do it, it was like it just blew my mind because watching him work as he was developing that, because he came into it after a previous actor was playing a part that was basically his role, and it was just amazing to me to see him. And so seeing him years as time goes by, we always laugh when we see each other. We just break out into a laugh because I think of that moment in that conversation where I learned that you can do so much with very little as an actor. And I saw it in person with him, and it was a real acting lesson. And I'm glad he was gracious enough to just let me talk to him about it, and explain it to me. Yeah.
Sometimes less is more, Brent, and you have to be truly gifted to understand it, but like Eddie Olmos to understand that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And believe it and have confidence in it. Yeah.
Yeah. Brent
Yeah.
Jennings, an absolute pleasure to talk to you today to relive your memories on Miami Vice. Your
Yeah.
three
I'm sorry I
episodes
don't
from
remember. I'm sorry I don't remember Jiveman that well. I remember the
no
other two
problem.
guys.
Your memories from Jiveman, You Herity, and the sergeant, dare I say, the up and coming sergeant and hotshot. No doubt, probably in some alternate world, he's probably running his department now, or maybe switched to Miami Vice, the one
Right,
with
right,
Orlando
right.
Jordan. From me, Jim Conlan, to you, Brent Jennings, stay safe, take care, God
You
bless.
too. My pleasure. Take care. God bless.